Hello. Today I want to talk about global convergence. This is cultural convergence. This is this idea that the direction that we're headed as a society, as a civilization, as humans on this planet in the next 25 years is towards a unity. So at one level, we are making a single virtual machine on the planet. We're connecting all our electronic devices to each other. All the phones in the world can communicate to each other. All the desktop, laptops, iPads, servers, and in fact, as we put the Internet of Things, more and more mechanical devices from a coffee, refrigerator, your car, all these things are being connected together, and that connection kind of forms a large virtual machine, one machine. And in the next decades, we're going to add more and more devices, machines, applications, humans to this network. And it really only runs as one machine. And even places where there are firewalls to control access to information, still the underlying technology, the codes, the CPIP, the Unix, the Unicode, all these things are still working in standard together, and they have the potential to all be one machine. So we are converging onto a unity of a single technological standard, single platform. It's called the Internet right now, and that will only continue. And again, there will be exceptions carved out where things are being protected and controlled, but basically the unit, the foundation is a unity. There is a single technological infrastructure. At the same time, we are working towards a unity in having a global economy. We have seen very, very clearly that all the national economies of the world are all tied together, and how one national economy does is dependent on how the other economies around it are doing. It's not a one-to-one, but there is definitely an interdependency of economies upon each other, and you can't really isolate a single economy, even a big one like the United States or China, from all the other economies around it. They are increasingly codependent on each other. They're increasingly married and welded together, and they will become even more so. No matter what happens with trade talks, the world's economy are knitting together, and they're reacting to the events in the same ways, and that a bump or a flash or an injury, a disturbance in one part of the economy can be seen around the world almost in real time. And so it becomes increasingly difficult to talk about one economy separate from all the other economies together. And the health of one is really codependent on the health of the others. And so in a certain sense, as the world economy rises and falls, so do all the other economies. And again, there can be momentary exceptions, but that's the general rule. And that integration is going to increase in the next 25 years. So that we can really begin to try to understand what's happening locally by what happens globally. And there is some resistance to that, nationalism of all sorts that deny that or that don't want their destiny to be dependent upon the globe. But in fact, that is where we're going. And I think the more one understands and accepts that, the better off we'll be as the world continues to make itself much more of a unitary economy. At the same time, it's also very clear that we have one climate. There are many weathers. Every area has their own weather, but there's only one climate, one global climate, which is affecting even the weathers. And our weather will be dependent upon the global climate. And that climate, again, is dependent on the actions of the entire globe. So the actions of one nation in terms of weather and emissions and other issues will affect everybody on the planet. And that kind of a unity, that kind of universal approach is something we're kind of waking up to, which means that the solutions, the remedies, the offsets to that global climate change has to be global in nature. They can't be just individual entities, individuals, people, cities, nations, states. There has to be a coordinated global effort. So even climate is reaching towards a unity. We also have cultural unities and convergences approaching. One of the things I've noticed is that as I look around the world and travel around the world, particularly in the urban areas, which is becoming the dominant mode of existence around the planet, that if you look at what kids are studying in school, their curricula is almost identical. They've got math, and a very similar kind of math. They've got science, hopefully, in most cases. They're teaching some kind of science, and it's the same science. They've got English. Whatever their native language is, they've got English in addition to that. They have history, and that history will probably be very much focused on their local history, but at least it's history. There'll be physics and biology and things like that, maybe some art. But that core curriculum, amazingly, is similar no matter where you're born. And that, I think, cannot but help produce much more of a unity in terms of the culture. So that out of that kind of common curricula comes people's interest in working in startups, in working in a company that is interested in innovation. Out of that background comes an interest in something that is progressive, that is working towards a community good. So that universal curriculum is engendering, I think, a universal converging culture. And at least at the lower levels of what we produce. So you've heard of Maslow's hierarchy, where most people and most time is spent making sure that we have the basics of food, shelter, clothing, safety. But that once we have those, we can begin to think about higher things like social meaning, interacting with other goods that may be not essential, like refrigeration, communication. But then at the very, very apex, if we have managed to satisfy all those lower hierarchies, we come to self-actualization for meaning and purpose. And that his idea was that we have to spend our time, we have to be comfortable and satisfied in those lower ones before we can really divert our energies into trying to mine the higher ones. And I think what we see in this global convergence is that those lower rungs, those lower hierarchies, those lower needs are going to look very, very similar around the world. If you ask young people, as I have, what it is that you dream about, what it is that you want, a lot of them will say, well, I'm looking for kind of a job where I can work in a air-conditioned room and with Wi-Fi. And that's kind of, no matter where you live in the world, whether it's Timbuktu or Kathmandu or Jakarta, there is a sense of wanting to have a very basic needs met, and that needs met is very similar in their appeal and their desire all around the world. So I think the lower levels of the Maslow hierarchy, we're going to converge on this unity, which allows us to diverge at the higher levels of what it means to us and what we get out of it and who we are. So we may see a divergence there while we have a convergence at the basic levels of food, safety, running water, Wi-Fi. Another place that we see unity is in science. And throughout the world, science has become, I mean, there's only one science. If you make a paper discovery, it has to be incorporated and linked to and accepted into the general web of all the other knowledge that we have. It has to be somehow connected and make sense to and be footnoted with all the other discoveries that we've made. So there is actually only one science. Anytime someone writes a paper enumerating a new discovery, that discovery has to be connected into the rest of all the other discoveries that we know about. Every paper has to be footnoted to all the other papers. All information and experiments have to be connected to other experiments done previously, and there is only one body of that knowledge, and that is science. There's only one science in the world. And so as we contribute knowledge, that knowledge is increasingly integrated and codependent on all the other knowledge that we know, making basically a unity of science and knowledge. And that's only increasing in the next 20 years, is that anything that we discover, anything that we know, we only know it to the extent that we can actually integrate it into all the other things that we know. And that body is science. And so there's a unity in science itself. There's also a unity and a convergence in youth culture around the world. Increasingly, a lot of the youth of the world are listening to the same musicians and same music, watching many of the same movies, hearing some of the same stories. It's not as there's not as much convergence there as there are in some of these other realms, but there is enough to suggest that there is kind of a global youth culture, that there is a unity in some aspects of youth culture, which suggests that as they age into the next generation, that they'll have some shareable culture, even if they live in Nigeria or in Peru or in Cambodia, that all those youth will share some aspect of culture far beyond what they would have shared 100 years ago. And that sharing of the culture, I think, will become increasingly important in the other unities and other convergences that we're talking about. So the final question is whether there is a convergence in our dreams of what we hope to be and where we want to go. I was suggesting that we may see diversity there, as many of the basic needs of humanity are satisfied, that we may be liberated to have an unconvergence, a diversity, a divergence in what it is that we find meaningful in our lives and our purposes in our life. But then again, we may have a convergence there as well. I don't know, but there is a sense in which, if we look at the long arc of history, that many of the things that people dream for, safety, peace, freedom, liberty, healthcare, again, basic needs, that there's a short list of things that everybody would say that they desire. And that short list probably has a lot of commonalities. And if they have commonalities, it means that we have the chance of having some kind of convergence towards that. And so it's very likely, though, that those things probably have many ways that they can be made, many arrangements, many political arrangements that can produce the same thing. And so there may be divergence in how they are produced. So I'm not suggesting that there is sort of only a single model that we're aiming for, because I don't think that's correct. There may be multiple models, but there may be a convergence on what we aim for, maybe not a convergence of how we get there. I don't know. It's a question, but we do have a convergence among all these other things. A single platform, a single economy, a single climate, a single curriculum in school, a single science, and maybe to some extent a lot of culture shared. So those at a kind of at a mechanical, pragmatic level are going to be something that we all share increasingly in the future. It will be something that we have in common. It may be that we have all that in common, and then we have the question of what does it mean to us? What is it we want to do? What is our purpose? And that we have multiple ways to reach those dreams. So in the sense that we have a convergence of the tools and a divergence of the expression of the content. We're all using the same ingredients, same alphabet, so to speak, same numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're all using those same standards, but we produce works and stories and literature and movies and stuff that are highly divergent in our expression. So that's one ways in which a global convergence to these unities could actually produce highly divergent and personal and liberated and exciting differences in output. So that's the convergence and divergence, and I think the coming unity in the basic tools that we're headed to.